welcome to the Meru Media Podcast with Mukunda.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Meru Media Podcast. Today, we're joined by, as always, a special guest, Professor, or more appropriately, Acharya Sthaneshwar Timalsina. He is a professor in San Diego State University in Religious Studies Department, but he's got a very unique upbringing compared to many of the people that have joined our show over the past, couple of years. Acharya Ji, that's how he likes to be preferred because it's a more traditional name, and he earned that title, right?
Yeah,
that's right. He comes from he's not Indian, he's Nepalese, and he comes from a very traditional Gurukula background, ashrama background, and moving from that into sort of Western academia background was a very interesting journey. So Sthaneshwar Ji is an expert in Tantra, Advaita, and Abhinavagupta. And kind of, I would say, given the fact that his life has been dedicated entirely to the Shastras and to studying Hindu texts, or even Buddhist texts, for that matter, he is an expert almost in all these areas. And he's got a very strong background in Western academia, Western philosophy too. So Sthaneshwar Ji, Acharya, please welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mukunda, for having me.
So, just to get a preliminary thing out of the way, Sthaneshwar Ji is also an Acharya to me. He has been teaching me Samkhya, Karika, along with Yukti Deepika in a traditional way. We had to take a little hiatus because we spent some time working on Yoga Vashishta for his class, which he just finished conducting. If you want, you can also check his class out on Facebook as part of his foundation called Vimarsha. But before we get into all of that, Acharya Ji, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your background is and where you came from and how you came here?
Oh, this is a multiple life journey, Mukunda, because it's like we just finished Yoga Vasishta, in which these characters undergo multiple life streams in a single life. And oftentimes I find myself as one of those characters because the romantic and mesmerizing and harrowing experiences that I have been through doesn't suffice to say all I gained in one lifetime.
Yeah.
Just to begin with, I'm born and raised in Nepal in a village called Dhading, and it's a district, Nalang, a particular village where I was born, in a Pandit family. And for as long as we can go, my ancestors had been teachers, and I have many of their handwritten manuscripts still in my collection. And so some of the manuscripts may be dating back to 400 or 500 years. And
wow.
When I was growing up, the old style Gurukula, or at least a remnant of it, I would say, was still alive. And one of the greatest dreams of my father was to keep that Gurukula alive. And so I grew up with my siblings and also some Gurukula mates, because the way Gurukula worked in the villages is we would have like a land, and so there would be more or less like a barn house, you can say, easy built, and 10 to 15, 20 students, not like a huge crowd. And they would stay there, they would eat with us, or sometimes maybe they would cook separate, and they would work during the day afternoon. The study would begin maybe like 5 in the morning, and there's just like a couple hours, 4 hours of study and something, and then maybe 4 hours of work, and then in the evening there's a sort of a memorizing time, and then also giving back, like the returning, like a homework time.
So when you say 4 hours of work in the day, what do you mean by that? Is it like physical work?
Yeah, physical work, actually working in the farm, and they grow whatever they eat, you see. and they are part of the family, part of working together. I'm also working. It's not like they are the workers.
Yeah.
So we collectively work, and there never was more than enough to eat, so we all grow and corn and maize and whatever, and then we eat. So they will work for, yeah.
If I can ask, so you say your classmates, were they from local villages, or were they
local,
from the same village, or? Okay.
Same and the nearby villages, and the type of structures were always there. Every village would have some pandits, and then it's just like whatever, 2 people, 4 people, 10 people, doesn't matter. It never was like hundreds of students type of huge, more structured Gurukula in the villages. And that's basically why when I was 12, my father said, look, son, I can't give you anything much, but I let you go. So you should go, you are brilliant, and you should learn Shastras. So kind of he released me basically. So I
mean, I'm very interested in the Gurukula, because I think it's a lot of people don't know, like there's it's idealized many way in how people think about it. But it'd be really interesting to get a sense of like what it was for you. I mean, so what would they teach in Gurukula? Would they teach math, science, or what?
It's a kind of, my own father was not like one of those great top tier pandits. Mm-hmm. So there are different types of no formal structure Gurukula, because when a guru says he's certified to do so, his word is the certificate, like a degree. So in ours, we would get anybody from age 8 or above, and maybe 15, 16, 18. And then depending on how intensely they want to study, either they would have to go to specialized teachers, and like in our fathers, they would learn basic mathematics, like so that they are able to do Jyotish, basic Jyotish, because that was required for even naming a baby, or knowing the horoscope for marriage, and so basic ritual level Jyotish. And then all the karma kandas, so every day to monthly or yearly round calendrical rituals, arranging marriage like rituals, so all types of rituals, Agni Sthapana, like so the rituals, chanting the Vedas, and basic grammar, Panini's grammar. So these were the basic things. And then doing Puranas, those kind of things were not part of the course, but they could learn that on their own.
So, I mean, was this parallel to regular schools? So how did it work?
We didn't have any regular schools those days, Mukunda. And then those regular English schools were replacing. So what happened, the older Gurukula structures, they were more formal type Gurukulas. Mm-hmm. And then they were, the government with this new education policy was rooting all those traditional formal schools out. And the traditional structures were taken control by the government for modern English education, and the villages were trying to keep it alive by this type of structure. So in my grandfather's generation, the school structures, even the Gurukula, would be different than the way I saw. And then in my generation, there were 2 choices: either like me, go to big town and have a formal education, get a degree, or go to now then renowned pandits, wherever they are, like in Nyaya. And they are, like, just to give you an example, 3+ years ago, when my mother died, and I was in a village, and I was in Devgat, and somebody from a remote area, whom he swears, I mean, of course, he's true, he had met me something almost like 40 years ago or so. Wow. I must have been like a little kid, and I have no recollection. And this man never had any proper job, and he just went to village, is growing corn, and like cattle herding, and then and he just came for just expressing condolences to my father, making like a long trip. They were friends, like in a connected from my grandpa,
Sure.
They were in my grandfather's Gurukula.
Yeah.
And so I got a little glimpse of the other side. This Pandit was more knowledgeable than, my own father. And then when when we were introduced, he asked me what I've studied on Nyaya, and then I'm like, it's like, what am I gonna, I'm sorry, my arrogance, like this village Pandit, what am I gonna tell him? Oh my gosh. I said, I've read Tarka Sangraha, and then he said, yes, have you read any? And then Muktavali, and yeah, Muktavali, you read, okay, what else did you? And then Panchalakshani, oh, you got that? And then, okay, Siddhanta Lakshanam, no kidding, did you get that? And then Shaktivada. Now he looks a little serious, and I say Vitpativada. And now, okay, now he raises this long phrase from the Siddhanta Lakshana, and then gives me Vyatireka Vyapti, which means like a reverse logic, which is sort of determining the proban on the basis of negation, which requires like 12 degrees of limitations, which we call Avachedaka. I'm like shocked. I'm really shocked, because this man is just a village man. He would be in the modern world if he was trained in Western logic in that same depth. He would be one of the best, maybe analytical philosophers in the modern West. And all he has done in his life is cowherding, and not that I'm regretting, because he was so happy, because for him, these studies never meant to get some occupation, some degree, some ego, or to write books and have a name. These are all modern Western productions. For him, study was for the sake of study, and if anybody came to study with him, he would teach. Traditionally, Pandits were either rich enough to have their own farm, so they would not require any endowment, and when they were not, and then the nearby, families. Like even here, I mean, I'm not running any Gurukula, but if I get 5-7 friends coming around, my support group, let us say, support team here would take care of it. I have that confidence that I'm simply trying to maybe, preserve some of the fabrics of this lost strand. And it is awesome, beyond the construction of the ego, the money, the name, and I just like, I was just amazed. I just wanted to share.
How old were you at that time?
I mean, at the time when I had met him before, I remember like maybe I was like 9, 10.
You've read all these books at 9 and 10?
No. This guy, when I met before, I mean like when I met this man 3 years ago, that's when I said, but I read this book. I started reading at the age of 16, these books. And I continue to read, even today, like even this day, I do consult. One of my teachers, Vidyanath Upadhyaya, he's both my Tantra teacher and Navyanaya teacher. And I do consult him more or less a weekly basis. So I do still study with him. He's 86 years old.
What's interesting to me, it seems like the ashrama system, or the Gurukula system was almost like a Montessori style of school. Right? Because you're working with your hands, you're learning text, you're learning grammar, you're learning basic science through like farming and engaging and math. And it seems like it's much more multi-sensatory than simply just sitting down and writing.
I know many people today who go to boarding schools and colleges and IITs, and they might feel strange, which I really want them to feel. And I have these 2 snippets from, I live in San Diego, Rancho Bernardo, and 2 snippets from why this knowledge supersedes this modern Western contemporary knowledge. I apologize if this example offends anybody. I have this guy who earns a minimum 3 times more than I, as a professor of San Diego State, do. And I invite him to my house, a really wonderful engineer, and then show him around my backyard, my front yard. All I have to show is my plants. Oh my gosh, look at this plant, and look at this fruit tree, and that fruit tree. This is tomato, and this is like, and then he looks at me, Timalsina ji, I have seen all the fruit trees, but I have never seen a carrot tree. Have you seen one? Mukunda, I'm not even kidding. And then that time, I just didn't know what to say. But but I didn't theorize that experience, because one event is not enough. So just 1 month ago, what happened? Another gentleman, different person from the same profession, of course, came to my house. Again, I'm idiotically showing around with my pride all the plants. He got totally excited with a vine. He asked me, "What is this vine?" I said, "It's a pumpkin vine." "So do pumpkins grow here?" And I said, "Look, in Nepal, we even cut the top of the vine and cook them, like stir fry them." Of course, you have to take off the external skin, and then cook them. And then when the pumpkin grows, and then we also eat the pumpkin. And the next question he asked, "Then do you dig out the pumpkins?" Like potatoes or sweet potatoes, no, we do not dig out the pumpkins. Pumpkins actually grow out. So I really think that in this over mechanization of education, many people, which may feel strange, but I'm now thinking that it is not just one exception. There are many people who have been totally separated from the nature. They are growing up in these boarding schools inside, and
even the city, right?
In big cities where there is no farming happening, and they only are exposed to the food, or fruits, all they want. And many people don't even see vegetables in the form they grow, because they only see the cooked ones,
I mean, I think the only reason I have, to be honest, have any sense of vegetables and fruits and stuff, it's because when we're young, my mom had a garden in the back, right? So to that extent, right, I'm not like knowledgeable. I don't know how to farm properly. I don't know how to milk a cow. I've done it once. It was weird to me, but it is something. Like I will have to say, this has been longer with us than these modern cities have, right? The ability to farm, to engage with the land, to have a relationship with the land more so than ownership. Ownership was part of it, but it was a relationship, right? Which I think we've kind of lost.
To really understand land ownership, also, Mukunda, you touched upon another issue, that when I was maybe 5 years old, when my father purchased a big land in which we had that Gurukula and all. I vividly remember the conversation of the sense of the guilt, and of course there was monetary exchange, not a lot, but then he used to, the guy who sold the land to us used to come to our house every year as a special guest, and we always prepared food basket for him in honor. So my father also agreed modern laws, and of course you have to buy somebody's land, but also ethically, he never accepted that he purchased. So he asked him to donate. So he gave the money, and he still accepted as donation. And then always he considered him not in a legal sense, but in a moral sense, like a landlord,
a patron,
patron. So that, and up till my grandfather's generation, land was abundant, and in the villages, land ownership was not big enough issue. Like if somebody resisted, I just want to grow here, nobody cared. But otherwise, people were moving. So nomadic life was not over, because how do I know that? Is when I asked my dad, before the house where I was born, I want to go to see the house of my grandpa. And then my dad gave this kind of very weird concept. I mean, it's strange for me that even up till my grandfather's generation, it was okay to move, your herd from like a nearby village to other. They were not migrating far, but they were like semi-nomadic even up till that generation.
So, I mean, is this because all the land is owned by the king, and the king gives grants for periods, or why is that?
There's some land, like prime kind of land, and there are like deeds and the kings given, but there are other like other type of half agricultural type land where people grow one season only, and the rest of the seasons left to for the wild. And So some lands, particularly in major towns, had a clear-cut ownership, and in mostly village styles, the ownership where the government land begins and where the private land ends was not very clear-cut.
I see. Now, when you were in Gurukul, what was the medium of your study? Was it in
mixed language, Sanskrit or Nepalese? And when I went to Benares, for example, the same, either Sanskrit or Hindi. And I do not, more or less the same, although Benares, where Sampurdananda Sanskrit Vishwavidyalaya, that is where I got my Acharya degree from.
Yeah.
And so this, even there, although this modern university structure has taken over, all these teachers are paid by the government, but the remnant of old Gurukula is still alive. If I can share you like a quick
sure.
My first day in Sampurnananda, and again this Guruji is still alive, and he's maybe like I don't know, 87 or something. And I ask anybody who listens to this to convey my greetings to, or try to communicate. He's a legend, Ramji Malaviya. His son Nandan Malaviya is still online, available on Facebook, and we grew up like brothers. So so although he's a professor, okay, and he was also pro-chancellor for the university, but because he grew up in Gurukula, and as soon as he met me, and when he got the chance to feel me, he let me become a part of a family. So I ate most of the time in his house. Mm-hmm. So the first day, we were really acquainted in his classroom. He's teaching in university. And then I asked a bunch of questions, and then he asked me to just keep quiet and then just to walk with him after the class. And then I just kept quiet, and then he says, come to my house. And I'm like freaking out. Oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? Maybe I offended the very first day, you know. Yeah. And then his house, professor's quarter was not far. It was right next. And then when we went, and then he sat in this mat, you know, the rope bed. Yeah. And then he said, from tomorrow you are not coming to campus. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm expelled just like that. And he said, instead, you just come here and eat with me, and then I'll teach you here instead. And wow. And then that is it. And so because and it was not just me, there were like 3-4 other students that he cared like that. The others were like, he would say, the others are for a job, you know, they just want some scholarship or something. They are not going to get it. They'll just waste my time. Right. But you guys should learn thoroughly. So that is how it was kind of semi-structured, you know. Yeah,
it's interesting because I had a similar experience, not with Acharya. So when I was studying Sanskrit in Delhi in 2000, so I was studying under this professor by the name of Prem Singh, who was a professor of linguistics there. And I think he studied at Harvard under, I don't know, Engels or someone like that, someone big at that time. Mm-hmm. And the same thing happened to me. So I was in class, in Sanskrit class with him, in class generally. He invited me over to his house one day, and I had dinner with him and his family. And then he said, from now on, just come here, and I'll teach you what I want.
No, that's how it goes.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was because I was so bad, and he was like, I need to get more attention, or if it was like he thought it was something to spend more time on. So we did that for about a year. So that was very. It was a very beautiful experience because I would go in the morning. So when I lived there, I would go in the mornings for music class in Connaught Place, and then spend an hour and a half music, and then go straight to Sanskrit for 2-3 hours, and then do the rest of my university classes afterwards.
Wow. So, I mean, with Pandit Brajbala Dwivedi, he was already retired when I went to Benares in 85. And still, when I went and introduced myself to him, he said, come over, and, every evening for 4+ years, more or less 5 or 6 days a week, I studied with him, So, wow. And there's no payment, tuition. I mean, those concepts didn't even occur to our mind.
So like you were in Gurukul at your father's place until 12.
Yeah.
And then where did you go after that?
I went to Kathmandu, And then there is a Sanskrit, more or less a modern Gurukula. Like it's not a Gurukula per se, because it offers all the modern degrees, but it teaches all the disciplines of Sanskrit.
No, but
So
was
that is
it,
a
how far was
Sanskrit.
your village from Kathmandu?
Those days, Mukunda, I had to walk for about 6 hours. And then only after that, I could see the bus or running the road. You know, it was so, I mean, like a really scary experience. I had not seen like asphalt road or like a bus running on the road, you know. So, and I took a bus and it took me 5 hours from that place, Maleku, to Kathmandu.
So you lived
But
in Kathmandu by yourself from age 12?
yes,
Oh,
yes.
wow.
Yeah. So then I mean, my father had given me a couple of names, who were somehow connected from great grandfather or something like
Yeah.
teachers, you know. And then all I had to do was to find some people who could help me manage a place to stay. And there was a Sanskrit hostel, which you call like a Sanskrit Chhatravas,
Yeah.
and a modern day Gurukula, you know. And so that is where I stayed for like about 9 years. And then, I mean, I kept going to India, like Delhi and Rishikesh and all those. But then for about like 8 or 9 years, I was getting degree from high school to undergraduate or Shastri from Kathmandu. And then for Acharya, I went to Benares.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
and then you were in Benares for how long?
4+ years.
Okay. So is Acharya equivalent to a PhD, or what's that really?
It's like master's.
Okay.
It's like master's degree equivalent, yes.
But then you had to go and get your PhD somewhere. So where did you go then?
I was thinking of getting a degree, PhD, started from Sampurnananda, but I just decided to not do it. And I just felt like I wanted to go get a degree. I didn't go immediately because I had to start my own department in Kathmandu. I opened a department for tantric studies.
Interesting.
That department is still running, like in 1991, and then till 99. I was running that small department that I started, and then in 2000, I went to Germany for my PhD in Martin Luther University in Halle.
Wow. I mean, that must have been such a, so, I mean, you've traveled so much throughout India and Nepal and done so much. I mean, what was life like in Nepal when, because, you know, there's over the past few years or past decades, Nepal's in so much transition between monarchy to democracy to, you know, was it tough during that period of time to be?
It's life is always tough in Nepal, Mukunda. That's why young generation is moving out, but in different ways. For example, when I was growing up, we didn't have electricity or roadways or anything. We didn't have anarchy either. If I were to have some kind of nostalgia, I could say that in the village I was growing up, the nearby village produced cotton for our clothes. The other villagers, like they were like leather workers, and we had enough of leather from our own dead cattle. We didn't need to rely on any leather product from outside.
Yeah.
Everything within the conglomerate of maybe like 6-7 villages, within like 2-3 hours of walking distance, everything other than salt, our villages produced on their own. We were independent. And we had like a self-sustaining ecosystem, and nobody knew non-organic pesticides, and also we were growing, of course, organic, and you know, so village life was simple. But of course, was it like equality and all those things? Of course, we can always talk about social injustice and all those things. One thing I want to draw your attention to, though, in that village, nobody was homeless, okay? I didn't understand the concept of homeless. Because why would you want to be a homeless? Villagers would just build a little hut for you. If you are single, that's even easy, just a tiny hut for you, and then that's your home. So the idea of homeless didn't exist. Not owning, I'm a homeless in that sense, because just because I have a house that is owned by the bank, in the Nepali traditional context, I would still be homeless because I still have to pay to somebody, you know.
Sure.
So everybody, it was not like a grand mansion or anything. It's a small hut, but nobody had to pay rent or anything for anybody. Everybody was self-sufficient, and we supported everybody, you know, in the village, and everybody had their little work. Even the storytellers, you know, who didn't do the job, they would just go and tell the story.
No, because I mean, it's probably as different from modern city life as one can think about.
Is and you cannot go to that village anymore in any part of Nepal. That type of villages having some kind of self-sustaining system doesn't exist anymore. And for good, we have modern education. You know, we have English schools everywhere. Mm-hmm. And for worse, we have a lot of anarchy. We have given all these fantastic ideas of revolution. And I grew up in the generation we had to throw the kingship, which is good. I mean, many people now think they were great people, good kings, Hindu kings. They were just another butchers. And it's good for the humanity that they're gone. But we didn't replace them with something better, you know.
Yeah.
We just got something worse. So it's just one after another. We have just seen through transitions.
Wow. Wow. I mean, it must have been a culture shock then, go from Nepal and India to some place like Germany, Halle, to do work there.
Of course, because like if my dream was just to go to the West, which most of the youngsters in Nepal, India dream these days, I could have gone to Leipzig instead of Benares in 1985, because there was Professor Bernard Kolber. I was able to read the manuscripts and ancient scripts just by family training.
Yeah,
I didn't need a special training for that, but then my Sanskrit knowledge, and he was impressed. He was doing research in Kathmandu those days, and I was introduced to him by my Nyaya and Tantra teacher, who is still alive. And so I was asked if I wanted to go to Germany, and I respectfully declined and chose to go to Benares, because that was more fitting for my nature. And later I realized that I was not, I would say, conscious enough of our time at that time. I didn't know where our society was or how far we had moved from our own ethos or our own value of education.
Right.
So when I realized that I should learn a lot from the West, that was the minute I decided, and then and I went to the West. You know, I went to Germany. I went first to Italy, and I stayed there for a few months, and then I just felt like I didn't want to do my studies there. And then next stop was Germany, and that's where I got my PhD from.
Wow. And then you made your way. Did you teach in Germany at all?
No. I was just doing my PhD part-time. Because I had a job in Nepal.
Okay.
I was on leave, and so whenever I had a scholarship, I go to Germany and then go back to Nepal. And then that time, first was like immediately after a year, I was offered a part-time job at UC Santa Barbara to teach Sanskrit. So I came here, and then for the summer, I went to work in Germany. So that is how I kept like a summertime working with my professors there. And then other times continue to write and then share the documents through emails. So that's how I did.
That must have been very interesting, kind of globetrotting for work.
It was very interesting, but it just gave me, I mean, I would say three different perspectives. I always find each having their own merit. The traditional way of Pandits learning, basically to add categories. Mm-hmm. It's not just about memorizing, because that is when you have a cultural decay and people pick up the worst aspect of it and exemplify that. So Pandit's job is not just to memorize the text. They are not like some recordings, you know. So their job is to have it digested, absorbed, all the thoughts that have given up till that time, and constantly keep thinking along those lines. And then if you come up with new categories, and then you add those, and many times a single Pandit would not even bother adding or writing a new thing. If you got like 5 new arguments from a book, you would just teach that to your student. or you would have Patra, or sort of a added commentary, and then you share just those leaflets insert in the book, like, because those days you have these folios, right? And then Patra, one folio you insert inside. And then when you have tons of that in 4 or 5 generations, maybe accumulated knowledge. So all the writers didn't come up with their like original ideas, because their teachers were adding, their grand teachers were adding, and you can't have like all 3 generations of teachers didn't write, and like boom, then you have one brilliant student who wrote all the books. That is how the West thinks, but that is not how it works in the Pandit tradition.
So that's I never really thought about it that way. So in many ways, one could even look at these great thinkers like Abhinavagupta or Shankara Ramanuja as having been part of maybe something like that, right? Been taught this knowledge and then passed on from person to person until it gets to them when they decide to write a commentary and they bring all these positions into play.
So Mukunda, this is a very essential thing for you to understand Hindu way of thinking, because we never thought of the ownership of ideas. And therefore, most of our Shastras do not have the author per se. Or we will call Vyasa, for example. I mean, for heavens, Vyasa wrote 18 Puranas, 18 Upapuranas, and Mahabharata and everything, you know, so, and Brahma Sutra and everything. So we know that historically there have been many persons. So, and then the same Shankaracharya later, you know, everything is like Bhagavad Pada, Shankaracharya. So who wrote this? The way today we write with all the references, and if someone copies me and doesn't give me credit, then, you know, I make a big deal out of it. This is also about my individuality, modern Western understanding of who I am in isolation of the collective. So most of the ways Acharya's thinking work is in osmosis and also through gurus. And we are not just like a, you have to forgive me if I make a total separation from the modern day gurus to the old gurus, because old gurus were actually thinking beyond what was given. Modern days, you know, you just pick up one guy who is just willing to be your doll, and then you just, you know, make him your guru. And you know, so this is not what gurus ever meant. Gurus were thinkers, you know. So each of the, why they pay so much reverence to their teachers and you know, oftentimes give credit to their teacher for their work is because, not because they were just, you know, worshiping their teacher as God, but because their teachers actually did the work. They are writing down the thoughts their teachers handed down to them. Most of my writings, even today, I can say that are in the conversation. When I think through something, like somebody asks me, can you write on imagination? Can you write on this issue? I just wait till I get back to one of the conversation I've had like 20 years ago, 30 years ago with one of my teachers, and then that resonates. So in a sutra, in an aphorism way, teachers have already given that. Not in writings, but that they live through me. So, and I'm just giving it a shape, giving it a structure of the thoughts that my teacher lived through. And I don't even know how much of that was imparted to them by their teachers.
So, I mean, what it seems like is the ideas and the thoughts are more important than necessarily who came up with it in a particular time. But there is some sort of reverence to the general group of people you would call teachers and gurus that you give reverence to for those thoughts.
Yes, and also we need to make this important because, for example, Abhinavagupta gives credit to 20 different teachers in his writings. And it is possible that, I mean, for most of the teachers, including his own father, his first grammar teacher, they were thinkers too. And so for most of the teachers, we do not find anything written by them. Were they just like, they were just good enough to teach Abhinavagupta, but not good enough to do any writing?
Or maybe they didn't care. Maybe they just cared to teach, right?
And they cared to teach, but most likely they didn't just translate a book or download a book in Abhinavagupta, right? They must have they must have taught him something to think in a new way. So it is possible that they had some new categories added. And then the job of Abhinavagupta, I'm not saying he was not original thinker, but it's just like, what is originality, Mukunda?
Yeah.
I mean, we are constantly learning from each other. There is no ingeniously, like there is no eureka. There is no unprecedented, non-existent creation ex nihilo. In Indian thinking, there is no creation ex nihilo.
That's right. Yeah, it's all from, like we study in many ways in Samkhya, right? It's all cause and effect.
Yes, exactly. Parinama bhada, a sort of transformation from one structure to the next.
Yeah.
So it's not a creation ex nihilo. I mean, even in our own creativity, we have creativity. What is a creativity? In assemblance, most likely, and then giving a new structure. And then is new structure just a sort of a putting together of the same thing? But there is originality. Like you cannot say that, the bridge, San Francisco Bridge, is just a putting together of the pieces of iron,
Right.
It's in one sense it is, but there is some originality there.
Right.
So creativity comes in the process of assembly. But that doesn't mean that they had to find some non-existent raw materials to start from.
No, I think you're absolutely right here. I mean, this is always. You actually wrote a book on creativity. Did you not?
I am working on it.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of projects. I have not published that book. There are a bunch of things that inspire me, because something we say is like in the modern times, why there's so much creativity in the West and not as much in the eastern part of the world, and we have all these different social theories, and I'm just rethinking what even creativity means. So just you are able to have some bunch of patent rights, and then you are just creative, original, and you are living, some of these great ideas. Then you have you lack originality, or you have no creativity, So it's just like what is the scope of creativity to when we say something is creative and some others are just copies,
So what's a good example about creativity that I think is amazing is music, right? Especially in the Indian style of music, right? Like Western has its definite benefits. I love it, but like for example, like in Indian music, like the same song or the same raga, every time you hear it is as different as night and day, right? Every time you hear it is different as night and day.
Every tabla player I listen to, every sarod player I've listened to, every sitar player or flute player I have listened to, there is unmistakable originality. Not that their beats are different.
Yeah.
It's just like, he's also playing the same thing. No, he's playing the same raga. No, he's playing the same raga. Yes. Sometimes maybe they are also making new ragas, but that is not even the case. So originality does not function through dissociation from history.
Yeah. I mean, like within the raga, example is you have a set scale of notes. Like if you go Rag Durga sa ri ma pa da sa da pa ma ri sa ri ma. So you can use that system of notes and create originality every single time you sing it. So every way you sing it, it's different. It sounds different. Like, and this is where I find that it's beautiful. And I wish I had a better musician than myself on to explain this. But for me, it's been a long time since I've done it. But it's such a way in which, even though you're bounded with these notes, you're unbounded in how you can use those notes, right? Yeah. It's like it's a finite series, but it's infinite within the finite series.
Yes. So it's like if you say you know, you have only 4 of these acids, you know, and
Yeah.
for building your DNA structures. And is
Yeah.
there any into the variations of
No, yeah.
you know? So this is the same thing. We may be following the same beats at the same way the ragas, you know. So it's like also with the shastras, like you know, I know Nyaya, and we kind of make it as if like every Nyaya thinker from Badshayana to Raghunatha Shiromani, or even some later thinkers like Hariram Shastri, for example, you know, my guru's guru, like they are the same, they are reading the same book and thinking the same old, you know, already thought. No, they are not doing that. They are within the system of thought, but they are always bringing something new.
Right. So I want to get back to this, but I think this is a great jumping point into talking about, you know, Abhinavagupta, who was considered by many to have been one of the most creative, original, and you know, I wouldn't say iconoclast, but very powerful thinker within the Indian tradition. Right? He wrote on Vedanta, he wrote on Tantra, he wrote on Natya Shastra, he wrote on, you know, Alankara, he wrote on so many different areas. I think he even did poetics and math, and did all these things. Where he was a true polymath and a polyglot, you know, like. So, can you tell us who Abhinavagupta is? He's not very well known, even amongst Indian thinkers.
So yeah, I mean, one of the things Mukunda, you brought it correctly, is that while thinking traditionally, individuals do not matter as much as ideas.
Yeah.
But in the modern world, if we fail to recognize these individuals, to brand these modern world is about branding.
Yeah.
And if we fail to do so, then ideas alone either get lost or get swallowed by other people who take that credit, and then they get dispersed and dissolved into the vast oceanic thinking that is the modern world.
Yeah.
So, for example, when I talk about Dirgha Tamas, I mean, how many people do even know the name? I'll come to Abhinavagupta, but I have to pay homage to Dirgha Tamas first, because I mean, Dirgha Tamas is in the earliest part of the historically the earlier construction, earlier section of Rig Veda. So even from the Western standard, he could have been around 13th, 14th century before the Common Era. And if you read the text and try to decipher the riddles he made, and even a little bit you know about his own life, his blindness and the way he was abused, all these things, you get a historical person with having original thinking. And we are like, you know, we are kind of, I don't know, you have a term, you know, always this complaining about how the West is not doing justice for us, you know. So this is like Dirgha Tamas. I would love to read a book on philosophy of Dirgha Tamas, for example, and immediately like, okay, well, you know, the West didn't. Why should anybody else do that for you? So when you go to philosophy classes, Mukunda, you have attended philosophy classes. So go to first 100 level, you will go to history of philosophy 100 level class, and then it begins from Greece. Of course it should, because you have this history. But if you start from Thales, for example, Anaximander or all, some 7th century thinkers, why can't we start from 12th century BCE, 14th century BCE, by simply translating those texts not in the Indological way, because that only preserves the originality but fails to have a communication with the modern world, but have those translated in the modern philosophical terminology, not like violating the text, but making them speak for our generation, and engage them with some of the Western philosophers, so that they come to dialogue, they come back to life. So that is why I'm talking now, going back to Abhinavagupta. So for Abhinavagupta, we have it easy. Honestly, like I worked for a long time on Sankara's Advaita. I do continue to work and study on Sankara's Advaita, but honestly, we can do theology and we can do, to some extent, philosophy too from Abhinavagupta. But the extent to which we can make Abhinava's philosophy applicable to modern world. We cannot do that by bringing anybody from classical India. Abhinavagupta was full of life. He didn't deny the world. He didn't deny our everyday. He didn't deny the joy we could have in this body, in this world, this world. And he didn't deny the change. That's where I find this. Maybe he's the first philosophy of dynamism that we rarely get. Everything is stalled, static. Brahman does not change. Nothing changes. And then, boom, in the West also, you don't have that many philosophers of dynamism.
No.
Like you can. There are like very few thinkers.
Well, I mean, yeah. Later on, you get someone like Whitehead, who's more dynamic.
Right.
But I mean, but in the medieval period, I don't think, to be honest, like, or even the near ancient period, dynamism was seen as a problem, right? It was seen as change was evil. Change is the problem, right? Because even if you look at Neoplatonism, it's all about going back to the one who never changes, who's always fixed. The emanations all are changing. Everything changes, so they're all false and problematic. But it's I think that's fascinating position of Abhinava's that the dynamism of reality is
yes, I find this very essential, because if you read the history of Western philosophy, one of the ways, like particularly what inspires me, is to read from Heraclitus and Parmenides. And you can see this dialogue between Heraclitus and Parmenides of static and
flux,
dynamic,
and then the one,
and then you can find that in Henri Bergson, a French philosopher, Matter and Memory, and similar in Gilles Deleuze. You can find that type of thinking to some extent. I mean, Guattari and Deleuze. That's why I read Guattari and Deleuze a lot. And so in the case of India, we have like this number one. We have thought that this type of dynamism is captured in maybe some form of Buddhism, because it said impermanent. And everything. But that impermanence is very different. It's just chopped pieces of moments, and it's not of enduring things. And I am more interested in a grammarian named Yaska.
Yes.
Who could be before or contemporary of Panini. And let me give you one small example of the Yaskan way of thinking. Sarvam nama akhyata jamau. Every name word is derived from the verb. So if you see what is bhava, materialization, like for example, go is, the word go means cow. So the cow is derived from the verbal root gum, to go, and bhava means when you have this substantivized, and then you have it materialized, as if like this suffix after the verbal base gum makes that word go, means the entity that just some animal, that just keeps going. I mean, like keeps moving. So it is not just a name of something as a name, but it describes some kind of intrinsic property of the being, in which the describing factor is from the verbal base, and every verbal base is referring to dynamism. So if everything in the world has one or another name, and one or another name already embodies some form of dynamism, I think Yaska was one of the first philosophers of dynamism. And then you can see that I love Bhartrihari. I've written a good amount of essays on Bhartrihari, and I find that same type of breath living in Bhartrihari. He was not just a grammarian, because he wrote on metaphysics, like the Vakyapadiya. Many people read Vakyapadiya as a book of grammar. Unfortunately, Vakyapadiya is the most encyclopedic book, and he should be considered, like in a real sense, one of the fathers of modern like an Indian secular philosophy. I was talking about Yaska, and then
And
I jumped.
Bhartrihari. Yeah,
And
to
then I
Bhartrihari.
jumped to Bhartrihari,
Yeah.
5th century. I'm just like, there is a 1,000-year gap, Mukunda, you need to know between Yaska and Bhartrihari. It is not like a 50-year gap or something, okay? So in Bhartrihari too, many people, because it's a Vakya Padiya on sentence and words, but Brahmakanda, the first book of maybe 180 around that verses, is on the metaphysics, and it's like even when the book goes like the Padakanda, and then you will find it describing on substance, on the genus, on time and number, and space, on guna, and all these categories he systematically addresses. And so you do not find that depth of all these issues by reading a single philosopher of that time without reading Bhartrihari. So that is one of the hindrances of not advancing Indian philosophy further, is also not recognizing the gravitas of thinkers like Bhartrihari and coming to Abhinavagupta, for example. We have not recognized. And one of the things is like, like the extent to which we read Shankaracharya or Ramanuja or Vallabhacharya is a denominational. It's like the churches, the ashrams, providing food and shelter to study those books. And now with these new emerging Swaminarayanas, because they are creating new theologies and making the schools to teach their books. And so there is no separate ashram structures to propagate Bhartrihari or Abhinavagupta.
Yeah.
And therefore, there are some other texts that you need to study, for example, Panini. So therefore, even if you are not interested in grammar philosophy, you still study Panini just for the sake of learning language, but because you do not need to read all these other Abhinavagupta. That is why in the modern curricula, that was one of the things my teacher, who was also rector in the university in Nepal, Professor Vidyanath Upadhyaya, he recognized, and he asked me to go to Benares and study with masters so that I could establish a department of Tantric studies to have the teachings, mostly to teach the literature of Abhinavagupta and his teachers like, are Somananda, Utpaladeva, Abhinavagupta, Kshemaraja, primarily these texts, because we needed to have a department in Nepal, at least one department, and to have that knowledge.
Wow. That's really, that's amazing. I mean, especially to have, it's great because Abhinavagupta is actually from the mountain region himself too. So it's good to have that established in the region where he was probably around. Who was Abhinavagupta? Can you give us a little bit of background on who he was, if we know, or is he very much not?
Compared to other people of that time or those eras of the Indian philosophers, we actually know more about Abhinavagupta. We have a rough idea of later 10th, early 11th century as his time in one of the bhakti, one devotional song he composes. He writes his date when it was composed, and in some other texts too, he hints here and there, also gives chronology. So he's forget these all the places, but his grandparents moved from another region, so it's not like he doesn't trace all the genealogy from Kashmir, but he loved Kashmir. In the Tantra Aloka last chapter, you can see his praise for Kashmir. He really loved the place. He had high, reverence for what Kashmir was, and he was full of life. I mean, there like a lot of, we have mythologized, like he walked into a cave or something, non-historical kind of, we also fictionalize when you have like great masters. Sure. But if we remove all the fictions, we still know what he wrote. he wrote, mostly in a commentarial way, but he was very cosmopolitan, Mukunda. Like when he's rejecting some ideas, he's not behind, like after some schools, just for the sake of rejecting ideas. Mostly he gives thorough credit for whether they are coming from the Buddhist school or Chinese school. So he has this honesty to give credit for other ideas if they are deriving. He's not rejecting ideas for the sake of rejecting.
Sure.
He embraces, he does not hesitate to take ideas from other school where he finds comfortable, to learn from others. And so that is itself deviating from more orthodox, traditionally bound old Pandita structures. And next thing he does is when you are reading this Bhagavad Gita or Paratrishika, and then he sticks into it, okay, well, this is another way of, and there's in some manuscripts, I've seen this. So he does not just stick to one manuscript for one reading of the text, and if he finds variations, he actually compares like modern Indologists who are editing a book. So he's actually editing a manuscript, and he says like which manuscript to rely. And if they're like both the possible readings, then he gives meaning from both ways. He has done that.
He does that with the Gita, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Because his manuscript for the Gita is different from Shankara's.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So that is something that shows that. He's not just being honest about his school. He's being honest as a scholar, honest for the scholarship itself. And so what he did, they say he wrote like 40 plus texts, and of course we do not find a good number of them. But even those that we find today, he has substantial amount of metaphysics. You can find like a Paratrishika Vivarana, or Sri Tantraloka, Tantra Sara, Tantra Vatadhanika, just to name a few. Sure. But also they say he wrote a commentary on Shiva Drishti. I don't think we have it now. But on epistemology, mostly writing in a commentarial way upon Utpala Deva's Ishvara Prativijna Karika. Utpala Deva himself wrote 2 different commentaries for like a short and lengthy one. And Abhinavagupta wrote 2 extensive commentaries, sub-commentaries upon those commentaries. So Vimarshini and Vivritti Vimarshini. So this is like a really magnanimous volume. I have them here. And so on dramaturgy, you have this Abhinava Bharati, like an extensive book, and the writing the commentary on that. And if he was only interested, that is what I meant. I don't mean to disrespect Acharya like Shankaracharya or Ramanuja, but when they are reading philosophy just for a soteriological perspective, they are interested in writing commentaries or prakarana, like independent chapters that help you liberate or help you contemplate upon something, but then that is it, and then what about drama? I mean, why should Abhinavagupta write about drama and at the same time write extensively on upayas, methods of liberation? So he wrote on not just drama, then you have this Dhvanyaloka Lochana, so on the philosophy of Dhvani, sentence meaning, and then the suggested meaning, like a deeper layers of meaning, how to contextualize meaning that goes beyond the words. It's like what is hinted at, not expressed directly. So on poetics basically, and then he wrote like commentaries on texts like Ghatakarpa, like somehow in a simple text, but still finding something creative, a new way of looking at it. So he wrote in like a Bhagavad Gita commentary, for example. So he was not bound to just one way of thinking, although you can, of course, derive overall philosophy there.
Yeah.
But even then, and without any contradiction, like many thinkers have, like early Abhinava, later Abhinava, and there's a contradiction. I don't think so. So without contradicting oneself, he's constantly evolving, coming from early age, maybe more devotional writing, and texts like Tantra Loka more into metaphysics, and then most people would think, going to more spiritual line. No, and he goes more to epistemology, So as a mature Abhinavagupta is an epistemologist. So it's an amazing journey, and he's not duplicitous, like he's always honest about his own Shaivite background, but that doesn't mean that he shows any disrespect and then he doesn't try to make other texts like a Natya Shastra into something that is not, make some theology out of it. So he honors, like Dhanyaloka, for example, he honors and preserves the text in the way they were by only adding like 100 new categories, 100 new ways of thinking into it. So yeah, he is like in Indian thinking, there's just one another guy, honestly, historically, who was more or less like him, Vachaspati Mishra. So Vachaspati Mishra also shows like great integrity and honesty towards writing different commentaries on different disciplines. And when he's writing on Nyaya, for example, he is not trying to reduce Nyaya into Vedanta. And when he's writing on Vedanta, he's not trying to make it into Sankhya. So, and when he's writing on Sankhya, he's also trying to be as honest as he can within the system of Sankhya. So that type of integrity you can see in Abhinavagupta.
Wow. Wow. And you touched on a point that I think, is a very contentious point in this day and age, especially the concept of Tantra, right? What is Tantra? This is what it means to with people within India, to practitioners who are across the world, the West. It's this sense of like it's sexual. It's like subversive. It is this. It's almost like this extreme physical sensuality type of practice, which is not true, but it is kind of true. So what is Tantra?
Now, don't ask me to define Tantra. Again, it will be unjust to like a tradition, but again, because I don't want to just wash off by my hands by saying it is difficult. Yeah, whatever I say is not going to be appropriate and enough. That's what I meant.
Sure.
So in one Tantra in the cross-cultural context, I wrote this paper like 5-6 years ago. I asked you to read that. I have some funny anecdotes in there. Tantra, when you hear Tantra, forget about when you hear. Let me give you my own example. After I established my Department of Tantric Studies in Kathmandu, the only type of people who consulted me were either having I don't know what the real status is, either having problems with ghosts and spirits, so I could do some kind of exorcism, or wanted to hypnotize somebody, or thought they were being hypnotized by somebody, or wanted to cast a spell on someone or something like that.
Yeah.
So these days, it's kind of easy to talk about the West and look how romanticized, but let's talk about India itself, okay?
Right.
We have to have that level of integrity. If we want to critique on others, we need to have self-reflexivity. We need to be self-aware subjects.
Yeah.
So this way, even in the homeland, Tantra has been reduced to some ghoulish, some like Agori type, cremation ground type, scary ghost, goblins, black magic, tantric, bhoot, and this is one sad thing, and not that there is nothing related to possession and exorcism and something like that within the branch of Tantra.
Yeah.
But the same goes in the West, that as soon as you hear Tantra, then it is all to do with sex and this all types of fantastic. Actually, when I picked this book, Tantric Yoga, it was written by some Australian lady, I think. I don't know if you can find that book again, but I was in Kathmandu. I picked that book in 1998. It was sold in Indian market. So, and I didn't read the book. I just saw Tantric Yoga. I just picked the book from the bookstore. And then by the time I took home, we started a few pages, and then, oh my gosh, I have not seen anything like that, read anything like that in any real Tantric Agama text.
Is that like Diane Richards, that one?
I don't even know. Maybe
Okay.
maybe I'll give it but it was all graphic, most likely related to group sex activities, and so this comes from our own cultural limitations.
Right.
The Western culture, let's say mostly Judeo-Christian culture, is a sexually repressed culture and
right.
a masochistic culture, and then it is very liberating for them to think about fantasized sexuality, and like 1960s and 70s, when the great sexual revolution immediately connected with India. Let me tell you one thing completely unrelated. When I was going to St. Louis, that was my first full-time job in America. I landed in the airport. One guy who picked me up, and then this guy asked me if I'm Indian, and I said yes, because I don't like in Nepal, India. These boundaries don't mean much to me. I'm an Indian. And then you know what he says, this driver, wow, the land of the Kama Sutra. So I mean, is it like I always remember this. It is so funny. Is he trying to stereotype me? And then he says like.
But that being said, Acharya ji, India does have 1.4 billion people, so maybe Kama Sutra is the land of the Kama Sutra.
True. I mean, yeah. I mean, of course. I mean, no denying there. And that is basically the kind of like. Our own Rishi Paramparas were not based on this putting the loincloth and then, just emaciating yourself, or emasculating yourself. And so in Abhinavagupta and in Tantras, what you find is acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not like making it mandatory. Like when I say, I don't eat meat, or I don't even drink. And many people say, but you are a tantric. How can you do tantra without meat and liquor? So what tantra did is you don't have to do anything you don't want to do.
Right.
That freedom doesn't mean that then therefore you have to do the opposite of what people are doing. I know I have the freedom. I can choose to live the life I want to. Any dogma, any doctrine, any text, any guru, any god cannot impose anything upon me.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that I should just do all the random things and discard social hierarchies and structures and social life altogether.
Now within the Tantra system, then, even though you have the freedom to do everything or anything, does it still have the concepts of the Trigunas, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, in the same way? So if you decide not to, you can eat meat and follow a certain path, and that's totally fine, or you can be not a vegetarian, follow a sattva path, and that's different. It doesn't have that demarcation.
Yeah, many tantras, do have like different bhavas, what particular bhavas you want to generate, and it's like ultimately, if you are Mahasiddha, if you have already achieved all that is there to be achieved, recognize oneness with the cosmos. This could happen in some mystical states of experiences.
Right.
Then at that stage, whatever you do are the laws. Jatta rui, tatta vihi, jatta imadarti, tatta nisheda, iya ammana vivevo, iya paripanda matta sattanam. This is Maheshwarananda, a 13th century tantric, very much Abhinavaguptian. He says, yatra ruchi, tatra vidhi. What you want, what you desire, that is the law. Tatra vidhi. Yatra ima nasti, tatra nisheda. Wherever you have no desire, there is nisheda, prohibition. Iti asmakam viveka, this is the law we give to you. Why? Hridaya parispanda matra shastradam, all the shastras, disciplines are the pulsation of the heart. Wow. So when you are at that stage of recognizing oneness with the totality, then I can do what I want. Then would I want to kill you? when I recognize my own self within you, would I want to get some of your money stolen to my pocket? Or would I want to do some unjustful things against any other person, even insect? So, you know, the idea of this, which is rejected mostly, like these ideas are useless, not possible. But this is like the ideal is to reduce your individuation and to somehow recover your homogeneity with all the, not just humanity, all the sentient beings. And in that sense, trace your minimalistic being essence, in which you find something common with all the living, breathing entities. And in that regard, try to recognize their uniqueness by not rejecting your own oneness identity with them. So Abhinavagupta's philosophy is not a rejection of individuality, you know,
Yeah.
but it is also a sort of affirmation of that homogeneity. So we have something universal, common. We have, what do we have common? Hridaya, for Abhinavagupta, we have the pulsating heart. That is what we have common. Every sentient being has, you know, aham, that he says, this I am, the sense of I am. Even insect has that I am, beautiful. The way an insect experiences I am and the way I experience I am, he says there is no categorical difference. It is the same experience. There is no qualitative difference in the experience as such of the I am. And in that sense, what I experience when I say I am, or what an insect experiences when it has the feel, it doesn't need to say in language, you know,
Yeah.
but it has a feel of the sense. That is why it tries to protect itself, you know, like a self-preservation is common even to the shells in your body.
Sure.
There is some I amness already there.
Yeah, you know, it somewhat reminds me of Thomas Nagel's "What It's Like to Be a Bat." You know, his idea, right? His idea of consciousness, of how difficult it is to understand consciousness amongst different beings. But there is something there.
Yeah, no, he extended actually in one of his, not very recent, but one of the recent works, Mind and the Cosmos.
Yes.
He explores that from the panpsychistic perspective, you know, one of the strands of new way of thinking through panpsychism. So yeah, I like Thomas Nagel, and he has extended, continued to think in the same, that essay you cited came around like 1965.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. So, but yeah, he has continued to think more or less along the same lines.
So,
yes.
So let me ask you then. So one of the and you mentioned it already very briefly, but one of the cornerstones in especially in Trika and Abhinavagupta and Tantra is Spanda. What is Spanda, right? Because it's a unique concept amongst a lot of across any philosophy, I would say.
So the way I do believe that Spanda Karika was composed by Kallata, and you know, this is the genealogy of Vasugupta and Kallata. To what extent who composed Kallata has a short commentary upon Spanda Karika also. Pulsation. What is this Spanda? When we say Shakti, these pulsating energies, we fail to recognize that when we say these are the energies of Shiva, our fundamental flaw is that just like say these are my books, you know, and then like imagine if those are the Spanda energies, and I could say these are my Spanda energies. But then if all of these books are dumped, I will still be there.
Yeah,
I'll still exist. But if you dump all the Spanda energies, there would be nihilo, there wouldn't be Shiva.
Yeah.
So Shiva is just a collective name for all these pulsating, vibrating energies. There is no Shiva in addition to or in isolation of Shaktis.
I see.
So this is what most people fail to recognize. And this is where you are going to get this unique power structure for the future generation also, that there is this how to rethink the center and the periphery. Or and that already changes how to rethink the crown, the president, and the subjects, because like like a bee and the queen bees, and we were thinking like queen bee makes all the bees, but that entomologists already have found out that actually in absence of a queen bee, all the bees can collectively somehow manage to as if appoint or got to have a queen bee. So queen bee is not an isolation of or given by God kind of separate entity that has these lower minions. It's just a structure that is self-sufficient. Somebody has to assume the role. And so this is the kind of fold you can find almost in Baroque way of a power distribution throughout the cosmos. That is why it's like endless ways of thinking through energies, and that is what Spanda is. It is not just that Shiva has sometimes Spanda, and when he wants to vibrate, that the spontaneity of Shiva is uninterrupted and is not temporally finite, is not spatially determined, because space and time are product of this as a consequence of these spandas. There is this spontaneity is inherent to within the nature. But then you could ask, like, how could there be, if there's a Shiva nature, what type of pulsation, ultimate comes the difference. What type of difference would be there?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it's not a type of difference, but more about differencing. What do I mean by differencing? It's creating, projecting difference within yourself.
Sure.
So even when there is this singularity, within that singularity, you are free to recognize boundless diversity. The example would be like the waves and the bubbles and the ocean, for example. Like, you can think of it as the ocean and also think of it as the bubbles. Can we pause here for a sec, Mukunda?
Oh, yeah, because of the noise?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right, let's continue. Where I was, can you remind me first?
You were talking about the pulsating nature of Shiva and how
differentiating.
Yeah, so
because
you were mentioning about the ocean and the bubbles. Now, I mean, Sankara also refers to the relationship between Brahman and the Jiva, as in like the ocean, the wave, or ocean, the bubbles. But for him, the wave is illusory, right? Because it's not permanent. It exists and it goes away. But the ocean with Brahman is real. So how does Abhinavagupta answer that question? Is it an issue of time? So is it real for a moment and then gone, or is it always there?
Yeah, so it would be wrong to say that there is nothing illusory in Abhinavagupta. Mirage is still a mirage in Abhinavagupta, but where we make a mistake is just because there is mirage and there is error, like seeing a snake in a rope, that doesn't mean that everything therefore is a mirage, So recognizing this world, recognizing rituals, recognizing our everyday life, recognizing our senses, our physicality, our embodied nature, our activities, our actions, our duties, is very essential to Abhinavagupta, which are not the case with Shankaracharya.
Yeah.
So this inherent, for how does, I borrow this example, of course, even in our Yoga Vasishta conversation. That's one of the reasons why I love this book, is because it has full of that idea scattered throughout, that the example of peacock egg, for example, like are they there, the difference? Because like the way we have recognized difference is a preeminent to being in very Derridian sense, and then in Shankara's sense, difference is fundamentally a flaw, and so there is no inherent intrinsic difference with being as such, and there is no being as such in isolation of the becomings in Jacques Derrida. But what we find in Abhinava is as if both, not trying to please the both, but what we find in there is a latency. That is what Shakti is about. Latency is that our differences are not annulled. Even in liberation, when we recognize that we have something commonly shared, whatever constitutes our differences and the extent to which we want to preserve these differences are okay. Therefore, for the Mahasiddhas, you may have at least a hagiography, like you can find these Mahasiddhas, sustaining their life beyond time, living or keeping their individuality for a long time, even after being disembodied, being in the subtle body for eons and eons, like in the Yoga Vasishta conversation of Bhushunda, who is living for ages and ages, like Brahmas also die, come back, and then this bird is right there, So the idea, when we are treating philosophy or ideas, we have to not go back to historicizing this.
Sure.
Was there like a Bhushunda? I'm just interested in a concept, the type of philosophy these guys are trying to convey, and that is that very much embodied being and living in the world is one possibility, and that is totally okay. And it is not about negating your individuality and blending, merging, because it is all illusion and moksha, like moksha in here is the purna ahanta. That is what moksha is in Tantra, means purna ahanta. This I am is not erased, but it is in this I am that I get my fullness, in which you are not outside of it. I am everything, not just all the faiths and all the languages and all the cultures and all the humans. I'm also transgender and the gay. I'm also black and white. I'm everything. Everything is part and parcel of my own being.
Yeah. That's a powerful message, right?
Yeah,
it's a powerful way of looking at the world. For me, it's so in many ways. So Lakshmi Tantra, which I love, is very similar to this philosophy of thought about the nature of both, the universe, the Brahman, as we call him, it, she, whatever, and us as individual. It's a beautiful, like, vibrant, dynamic, I guess, intermixed world of reality that's so, it's so positive and so not denying anything. It's not taking away anything. It's really focusing on, like, the inherent nature of all things connected. It's beautiful. And the same thing seems to be Abhinavagupta's focus on the dynamism. Even staticness appears there, but it's so dynamic. It's static in its dynamism.
So you can, there's also a textual connection actually between Lakshmi Tantra and these Kashmiri texts. Like you can compare some sections of Lakshmi Tantra with the Pratyabhijna Hridayam of Kshemaraja. So there's just like these texts were not written by the same person or same school, but they were learning from each other tremendously.
Sure.
And so there's just a great indebtedness to each other.
Yeah, so with this dynamic philosophy of Abhinavagupta, why do you not think that Tantra hasn't taken seed like Advaita of Sankara has? Because there's so much more world affirming, so much more world engaging than Shankara's philosophy in many ways. It seems like the perfect philosophy to bring people together in many different ideas and levels.
So there are like a couple of historical factors. Number one, it's a matter of endowment, and I know you are in business, you can understand that. And as soon as I talk of endowment, people start saying, "Okay, look at this Pandit talking about money."
Yeah.
So what Pandits we are asked is we should just be selfless guys, never even eating food, or just sleeping in the street.
Yeah.
So there is no endowment for this type of thing. What I mean is, historically, when Kashmir collapsed, right, maybe 100 years after Abhinavagupta's time, so there was no kingship to actually sponsor the way of thinking that you could determine purely philosophical type agama type tantra.
Sure.
And then these ideas took time, and then mostly the India after that is, we are thinking in a very different way. The political, I don't want to go into political issues, but you know very well of the turmoil after Islam came to India, and then some of the institutions that were strong did survive. Some of the institutions that some of the other thoughts that didn't have their own institutional support could not survive. And even think of the Buddhism, for example, could not survive in India after that, because there's no real Buddhist writing that continues after like a 12th century in India in any meaningful way. So that Abhinavagupta comes right around the time when after they're just like mostly this new type of thinking do not get any sponsorship, and if you already had support. And then in the modern time, it's being difficult to cross over the stereotypes. Also in India, myself, as I told you, when I went back to Nepal, I had to cry. I wept. I've slept under the stars. I have, and like I had to do all kinds of campaigns just to start the department for tantric studies because the university rejected. And one thing I remember, actually, I jokingly told this rector then, he unfortunately passed like a few months back, but this guy who was a rector when I was trying to get the department started, and when even he could not stop from happening, and in his reluctance, he told me, do not come asking me for a lab with liquor and prostitutes on it. My gosh, yes. So I kind of jokingly reminded of him of his dialogue just a year back when I was in Nepal, and you told me this 25, 30 years ago, and he just laughed. So people are like Orthodox. We are also it's an idea of either modern generation picking up, liberating from all these hegemonies. Our own type also, and then being able to adjust to some of these new categories, new ideas. And then the West, I mean, why should the West worry much about how to revive Indian ways of thinking,
Right. So, I mean, it's interesting because like you bring that up. It's one of the things I have read when I started reading like, philosophy or Indian philosophy like 20 some years ago, was a lot of the writers back then when they would write about like why someone like Nimbarka or Vallabhacharya would come around, one of the things they would say is they looked around their society and saw tantric practices taking hold and they were rejecting these movements. And I thought it was just so funny because for me, like at that time I was like, oh wow, tantra must be really something else. But then when you go more into each of these different people's philosophies, so much of it is based on some form of tantra, right?
Yeah,
like,
of course, yeah. So there's this Vaishnava agamas, like Satvata Samhita,
Ahirbuddha Samhita,
and Ahirbuddha Samhita, and a lot of Pancharatra agamas, the whole way, particularly Ramanuja's thinking, grounded through and through, and Pancharatra agamas, and the Bhagavata thinking itself, his Bhagavatas were maybe one of the original Pancharatras with Ras and everything happening, and then they were most likely the original Kaulas, and even in Kashmir we find like people like brahmana who were Vaishnava and writing on Tantra in very philosophical manner. So this is what we find is Tantra is not just Shaivite.
No.
Tantra is not just Advaita either, because there are some Dvaita agamas, some Dvaita Advaita agamas, and some purely Advaita agamas, some Bhairava agamas, some Shaiva agamas, some Ganapatya, like Ganapati agamas, some Saura, Surya worshipping agamas. So let me tell you, where do you get all the temple structures like
Agamas, Vaikanasa.
yeah, in the Mayamata, you know, all the agamas, about the iconography, all the description of how to make the statues and everything. Where do you get that? In the agamas. And then the ritual from daily worship to all the calendrical ritual for all the Hindu temples, every single Hindu temple, okay? I'm not talking about, there is no Vedic temple for Hinduism at all in a real sense. All the temples have some agama, and we are mixing the Vedas, like we are chanting Vedas and all, but the basis for every single temple, every single Hindu temple is agama.
Yeah.
And we are not, you know, engaging this thing. That is kind of, you know, that kind of makes me a little bit emotional here, you know, because I struggle, even after coming to America, Mukunda, I struggle. My friend Glenn Hayes and I started this Tantra group inside American Academy of Religion, and I chaired the group for about 6 years, and I left later because my friends are working on it. Fine, the group is running very well. So we also do Society of Tantric Studies and you know, to refine scholarship. I have edited 3 times, I and Glenn guest edited a journal, Religion, for Tantra issues. And at least what we are trying to do, not about like, you know, give a mantra so this guy can get some magical power, not like that, but actually try to make sense of it. Try to understand in the modern philosophical, psychological, cognitive science, and maybe even sociological context, what does it mean to have those ideas, not just locating them in history. So that is one of the things that I find profound and meaningful in the West, that the Western world, when they are reading their own texts from their own traditions, they are not trying to locate them and freeze them in the ancient past. When you read Michel Foucault, for example, History of Sexuality, I mean, he read through and through Aristotle. You can find the imprints of Aristotle everywhere, but he's not just simply, you can find the same even in Heidegger, you know, in his own analysis of being is not just initiated by him. You can find that tracing back to Heidegger. He himself does in Introduction to Metaphysics, like he does give credit of how he started doing this analysis. And then, but that is not, he's not doing something parallel to Indology, you know, he's addressing and in the modern light, in the modern context. And something like that is not happening in our front.
Well, I agree. You know, I've discussed this with so many other, you know, academics, especially of Indian or South, I mean, I don't like the term South Asian, but Indian, Nepalese, or descent, is the idea that much of what modern Indology work has done is still the Western gaze looking through the methods and ideas developed in the 18th, 19th century that haven't really been updated, right? And I think this is like the work you're doing, which I really enjoy, is trying to look at our traditions, our texts through our own lens and applying what we've learned in the past 200, 300, 400, 500 years of growth of human development into the conversations about what does it mean? What does it mean to have like consciousness as defined in, you know, in the Vedic text or Upanishads? How does that apply today? How does Dharma work today? What do we think about these things? I mean, that's where I think we should really be focusing. What's the nature of biology and how does that impact the way we think about, you know, what Shastras talk about in terms of the mind, the brain, the, you know, manas, buddhi, intellect? How does that connect to modern psychology? Or does it? You know, these are the questions that we engage in.
You know, also our own, I mean, it has to come through young generation, like when we are able to educate people like you, or you are already self-educated. But what I mean by that is when these self-sufficient people who are working in different fields do understand the gravitas of this and understand, recognize the need to do so. Like today, for example, I have 8 unfinished manuscripts. I have separate book length text on memory, on recognition, on samskara. I have on dialogue. I have on nirvikalpaka, prejudgmental and judgmental consciousness. I'm currently working on time. And so it's like I'm holding on some of these manuscripts also to learn more from the West, because I kind of like to evolve from not just seeing how Sankara or Abhinava understood, but
Right.
repeatedly, I'm not assuming that position, but what would Abhinavagupta do if you were to just, capture him from 11th century Kashmir and dump him in like UCLA, in the Department of Philosophy and Theology, and then just inject the language of modern West, in his mind, so he doesn't need to waste like 20 years of life learning all these. So
right.
I repeatedly ask myself, I'm not interested in only looking at 11th century India.
No.
And what it means for us to have some of these ideas today, and how can we make meaning? And that is also a process of self-discovery, because for broadly the Hindu awakening, Hindu Renaissance today is, I'm sorry I don't want to go length, but it's just a very misguided sense of a projected history and
identity, and a fake identity.
And it is rediscovering what the Indologists gave. And then, so we should even finding that type of Aryan civilization, which we are already questioning,
Right.
So it's like that type of pristine, pure Aryan language, pure Aryan land. That is unproven theory. So finding this land is purely Hindu land kind of ideas. And then, so this is where our main defect lies today, Mukunda, that we should think for the future. Our thinking has to be future oriented. I'm not saying we shouldn't learn from the past, but whatever we learn from the past has to be for the future.
Right.
And then, so if we conserve our history, fantastic, but that history should not swallow our future,
100%, Acharya. I mean, one of the things a couple of things that really frustrate me is some of the ways I feel like the modern quote unquote Hindu Renaissance that we talk about is really identity assertion. It's just saying, I am Hindu. And we had some glorious past that was amazing and perfect, which it never was, right? Like, we have to be very frank that even when our history from the past, we look back, we had many problems, we had many issues, we had many same difficulties other civilizations had. But it's not about the difficulties, it's also the way we approach the world that I find to be unique, right? And it's that perspective upon the way we approach philosophy, history, politics, human connection that I think needs to be brought to this day so they can go forward. Well, one of the issues that we end up having is, well, we look back to the past and we think, oh, look at this great thought that Sankara had, look at this great thought that Ramanuja had or Abhinavagupta had. Why aren't we taking those ideas and, just like you said, putting them, dropping them smack dab in the middle of our world today and see how they contend with the world we live in, right? Instead of looking back to them as if they're gods and their words are immutable and not changing,
So if commentarial writing more or less ended in 14th century, we are lacking another 600 years of commentarial writing. And one of the ways would be, what would Sankara do or Ramanuja do if he was like, he knew all the disciplines of his time. He didn't just read some Vaishnava agamas and chanted Hare Rama, and then, that is not what he was, Like read Vyasatirtha, read Jayatirtha, like these from the Madhva and the Ramanuja traditions, all the later philosophers, they're like prominent logicians, They were grounding every single point on the basis of logic. And so what would they do today? They would not just recite the books from the past and then ignore the arguments from the present.
I agree. I mean, like one of the things that a lot of these, when you read any of these commentaries, these, I'm blown away by how rigorous their logic is, right? Like, in some ways, it even puts the logic of many of the medieval Western thinkers in the West to shame. Because one of the first things, like Ramanuja says, is like, you can prove or disprove Brahman on using logic alone. So logic doesn't matter here. And, and so he he says the only way we can know is we have to take this as assumption based on the Vedas. I mean, and he goes through a logical reasoning for why even the Vedas, if they say fire is cold or whatever, it should be discarded, right? I mean, it's not as if like they understood these things to be sacrosanct. Their very ability to give spheres of authority for each text, and how they even through epistemology, pramana, prameya, all that, to even figure out whether a text should be even thought of as being an authority or not, and why, was so rigorously argued.
So you're starting from Nyaya, Mukunda, like all the Shastras, disciplines have accepted Shabda, testimony as a pramana. But first of all, before even, because Vedas are Shabda. So without engaging what amounts to veridical knowledge and how it is derived, they do not just jump into, because it is in the Vedas, but what amounts to veridicality. That is where the Shastras begin. And so therefore, can language reveal the truth? Can we know something? Sorry, I had to fix the cord power.
No problem.
So my power is off in the computer. It will crash otherwise. So the same now going back to rethinking some of these masters. They may not have addressed on every discipline, every branch. For example, we may not get like a first-hand microbiology. But look at the way I am deeply inspired by the works that Mind and Life Institute people are doing, that Dalai Lama invites top-notch scientists and cognitive scientists and philosophers and psychoanalysts, like Francisco Varela, Ivan Thompson, like just to name a few. And then, but they do not just are another separate tribe. They work alongside the lamas who have meditated for a long time. They are sitting together. And then there are these philosophers like John Donne and, like all these top-notch philosophers working on Buddhist philosophy, and they are collaborating, working together. And then some of these neat ideas like autopoiesis, some of these ideas came in this conversation. And some concepts have been like accepted by modern biology, the system biology, for example, many categories within that. So why could not we do something like that? I have no objection to, doing, I do prayers, I do devotions and all that. But why do we make that faith as the fundamental category of defining ourselves and not rationality? Not like deriving from how we have preserved this. Like when you go to Vedas, like if you trace Vedas as your final authority, and what do Vedas mandate? Vedas mandate rituals, Mukunda. And then what happens in the ritual? Let's go back, starting from Shunashepa to all the Yajnavalkya's conversations. So there is a Vako Vakya, there is the dialogue. There is a dialogue, and they are trying to resolve the riddles, and they have all these riddles, like paradoxes in Greece. They were more like into these riddles, and in this, through the riddles, they were trying to solve all the metaphysical issues. So Katibai Deva, how many gods are there? Like, upon the conversation of Yajnavalkya. So these, and even in Dirghatamas, Ekam Sadvipra, Bahudha Vadanti, so these ideas came in already in dialogical context. And we have to preserve, when you think of, when people talk with me about preserving culture, I'm like, preserve the good thing, like when you say like, I mean, it's maybe a little outrageous example. So when you are taking, you want to preserve your mom, you take her to hospital and not to taxidermist, so the way I think what we are trying to preserve is we are taking our dying cultural civilizational mother to some taxidermist, who are going to
freeze her in time.
Exactly. So this is something that makes me feel deeply, and at the end of the day, why I even am thinking this Vimarsha is, I've already taught in different universities for 30 years of my life, and that makes me feel really old, but you know what to do.
It's
But knowing the limitations of the modern universities, I am talking with my gurus. Some of the modern professors in Sampurnananda are my classmates when I was there. Okay, nobody can lie to me that there are no students studying anymore. It's just like all these, like Khandar, like ghost towns. So no genius is coming out, and you will always have a name. Okay, 5 people there, 2 people there. You know, we are talking about 1.25 billion population, and you give me 5 examples to say we have enough. And so even modern, and then in the West, how much modern Western universities we can expect. So each teacher has a moral responsibility, Mukunda. The way that I cannot sleep well, I just want to, I know maybe I'm just going out of track, Mukunda.
No, it's okay.
You have to bear with me. I was like, in 1990, around the end of 90, when I was leaving Benares, and I touched the feet of Pandit Brajbalabh Dwivedi with full of tears, like crying. I said, Guruji, I have nothing to give you as Guru Dakshina.
Yeah.
What can I offer to you? And if a student in Indian context becomes like a son, okay, they raised me in many regards. What Brajbalabhji does is like he himself has tears I've never seen in my life.
Yeah.
He himself had tears and says, Kashi mein Sthaneshwar Panditya Parampara mar rahi hai. Tum iski raksha karo. The Pandit tradition is dying in Kashi. This will be a Guru Dakshina to preserve this. Okay? So we all have some obligations. My obligation from my father, when I got the job in Kathmandu in the university, and I shared my, the appointment letter with my father father wrapped it up and tore it and tossed it out. And he said, like, what will happen to Gurukula? He was not happy. He was offended that I was not going to continue something. And he saw that end times are coming because nobody wants to conserve these ideas that they thought of great value. And he was not worried about who does the ritual. He was not worried about who will be the priest. These are again, we are reducing the entire civilizational thinking into shaking the bells and blowing the tongues, So who will do the thinking? That is what was hurting him, even in a village, that was what was hurting him, that will continue this line of thought.
Yeah.
And that even the same thing, I mean, has that changed after being in America? No, I mean, I've learned a lot, and I do not think the way I used to think. I do not write the way I used to write. I used to write in Sanskrit, and I've not written in Sanskrit for a long time. But at the same time, the core of my being is still the same, and I still run, like I go back to teach, like in summers, and not just to go to teach. I study with my teachers even today. I mean, very few of them are left because most of my teachers have already crossed over. But even now, I am deeply connected to my teachers, and some of I'm just running a workshop for training for a new research in Kathmandu. I'm going to do that through Zoom next week. And so it's like, and I did that a week ago and a week ago too. It's like I am giving the best I can as a teacher, and that is all I can do. And are you doing the best you can? Not as a teacher, but whatever your discipline. I'm not asking you, Mukunda. You have shared a lot and time. You have given so much of time where you could have made a lot of money, and I mean, bluntly put. But that is the question for the people who say we have to preserve or conserve or all. Like when people, because it's not about lip service. It's not about saying because it feels good.
Yeah.
It is about the need of a time, because yes, the time is right. Some of these ideas can be revived and can be relevant, not the way they were then.
Yeah, you have to change.
It's not about the ghost, it's not digging out the corpse and putting life back, but it's because the same way, same ideas don't work, but like refining these ideas and allow them to breathe again, give them
Right.
life back.
Right. And I agree with you. I think that's a beautiful thing you just said, and it's a great place to get to our last section. We've been talking for a long time, and I love the message. Right, the idea is let's not live in the world of the dead. Let's live in the world of the living. Let's bring that civilization, those ideas that are on life support. Don't already throw it towards being made into a stuffed animal. Let's revive it and make it part of the way we think about the world, right? Because I will say this, despite me studying all these other religions and ideas, the concept of the way we think about the Atma and Brahman, I cannot find anywhere else. It's just the nature of most other religions tend to focus on identity that persists through life into death, right? Whether you're Christian in life, you're somehow still Christian in death, and you're in heaven, your personality persists, who you are persists. Same with Islam in many ways. But in our tradition, it's about rising above our identity, becoming more than our limited identity of who we are as Mukunda, as a human being, as a father or a friend or a cousin or relationship. It's about becoming the greatest self that we already are, which is the consciousness, right? The greatest denominator, not the least common, the greatest denominator. And I think these traditions give us that. Now, how do we take that and bring it back into our world? And I think that is what the great work you're doing in the various ways you're writing and talking and lecturing and thinking about these things. So from that, like you and all the other acharyas and professors and teachers out there who are trying to bring that to our world, instead of just saying, I'm Hindu, look how great my civilization is, and don't talk about us. Like, you're doing the work, you're putting the time, because this is effort. Nothing comes easy, right? So thank you for that. And so do you have any last things that you want to say about that, or do you have anything you want to plug, like talk about your foundation, or do you want to talk about
So the thing, Mukunda, I really want to say as a last word is these concerns are not my concerns as someone coming from a particular place. These concerns are not even a Hindu concern. These concerns are a civilizational concern for the sake of humanity. We have come at the crossroad where some ideas have been experimented and all the juices it can produce have been squeezed out. And we have to be willing to explore different ways of thinking. And there are so many other philosophers whose ways have not been explored. It is for the sake of humanity. Yes, I bring some expertise. We all bring different expertise. And then I might sometimes may appear exaggerating. And then the society should toss those ideas if they are tested and proven to be just, I'm trying to bring a particular thing to sell in the market, because the world is a marketplace of ideas. But the marketplace should be played on the basis of equality, equal opportunity. And there is no opportunity for us to introduce with our ideas. And this Vimarsha, Mukunda, would not be a Vimarsha without, personally speaking, Mukunda Raghavan's help. Like we are just like you start first class and falling apart, and then you just like you tapped in and then ran. But I didn't even have a chance to say, like, the conversation we are having after the whole conversation, like what burns me inside, what keeps me awake during the night is because it's number one, these things are valuable for the sake of humanity. And these things have the whole generational Pandits. Like we say Abhinavagupta. Now, where do you go to study Abhinavagupta? You go to Navjivan Rastogi, And then who else? I mean, tell me another Pandit from India who you can say decisively, he's a great scholar. I mean, you know, are you kidding? My Guruji Braj Vallabh is long dead. I mean, Ramji cannot teach. And Sankara Chaitanya Bharati is gone. So we don't have those masters anymore. What is the new generation? And then you have to rely on all the writings of Torella or Ratier or David Lawrence and Nemec, and which is great, by the way. I'm not saying therefore because they come from different cultural background, therefore you should read. You should actually read them and how honestly they have been writing and how sincerely, for whatever the side they have been sincere, you should read.
Yeah.
But then the idea is just being nostalgic about the past and talking about we are not given credit or equal opportunity. And then these ideas need some space to survive. Yeah. And all these ideas today have to compete in the same marketplace, where I was talking with you maybe another day that you go find one metro city in the globe, anywhere in the world, find one town where there is nobody who knows Kant or Heidegger. You aren't going to find it. Yeah. Find a town where there is no Abhinavagupta, every single town, okay?
Right.
So, and who is going to change that? This is us, Mukunda. So therefore, why I need your help is like or the help of other people is not for me. I don't care, you know, like I was dead 3 times. It's just not a great note to stop, but I was physically assaulted in the class by the Maoist, and that was one heartbreaking moment when I decided to leave Nepal. Yeah. And I was knocked down unconscious, and I was kind of, you know, hospitalized. I gained my consciousness after a couple of hours. They wanted to kill me. Even after that, I was like, now my wife is the witness. But this event was in all the newspapers in Nepal because a professor was attacked in the classroom while teaching, you know. Mm-hmm. So it's like I can just go back and expect from Nepal, which is now run by the same Maoist, okay, mm-hmm. and then say, oh, civilization is in crisis. They just want to kill people like me. So and my friend, I'm one of the fortunate ones because I'm living here thinking my classmate and later my colleague Mukti Adhikari. He was a principal in a village campus. He was hanged upside down and then shot by the Maoist. He died on the spot, and all the students and teachers were, if you read Sanskrit, this is what we will do to you.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so anyway, I wish I could change in something else. Like, you know, I didn't want this to be like around the end, but this came up, I couldn't control. But
no,
these things drive me to do the best I can, because I do have an obligation, because they are dead and I'm still alive.
Yeah.
They tried to kill me and could not.
Yeah.
And it's not just an issue of a romantic idea of let's promote these ideas, because if these ideas, why would people want to kill people for having these universalistic ideas?
Right.
You see? So this is not just a simple matter of cultural conservation. This is preserving the soul of being human. You know,
sure.
we in this sense of modern, you know, whatever political ideas, we have lost the soul of humanity.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's rediscovering what it means to be human.
Right.
Thank you, Mukunda.
No, thank you for your time. And I agree. That's what this entire project, me and Rachit starting Meru Media and being part of this is the process of trying to rediscover humanity through dialogue, right? Ultimately.
Yeah.
And understanding perspectives and ideas to preserve it and to bring people into the fold.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
I must thank my brother Rakshit. Okay, I mentioned you so many times, and I wouldn't even have met you without Rakshit.
That's
okay?
right.
So I don't want Rakshit to ever feel. I don't know if you will listen to this, but Rakshit, you are in my heart all the time.
Well, thank you, Acharya, and I appreciate your time. And so this is a great conversation. We covered a lot. Hopefully, you can join us again. If people want to reach us, if people want to reach you, how can they reach you if they want to reach out to you?
I'm all everywhere. You can just type my name, you know, like I'm not a hidden person. It's just like they can send a message on Facebook or email me, you know. Many, or just contact you and then you can bug me.
I can do that too. All right. Well, thank you, Acharya. I appreciate your time.
Pavana Munijana Yamuna Tire, Pavana Munijana Yamuna Tire, Gayati Vanamali, Gayati Vanamali, Maduram Gayati Vanamali.